Having been over a year since its launch, Intel's ARC series GPUs haven't quite seemed to have catched the mainstream audience of PC enthusiasts and gamers alike. And that is pretty strange considering what Intel had to offer when they released these GPUs in the butt end of the first quarter of 2022. And honestly, what they offer now still seems rather compelling considering what other GPU manufacturers have to offer currently. So let's give these video cards and its generation a reinspection for how well they have lasted and performed for over the last year. On paper, a GPU competitor to the likes of AMD and Nvidia to shake up the market and grab enthusiasts' attention or potential buyers who are strapped for cash seems like a good idea, especially for a company like Intel. And that is exactly what Intel did. Many of us are already familiar with what happened, but I want to briefly go over where ARC is today since things got a bit interesting. On launch, the ARC GPUs seemed like they would be a cheap alternative to Nvidia's high prices and match the performance of AMD's lower-rated cards to the very least, maybe even having an edge over one of these companies with something like more VRAM on their cards, for example. But that wasn't exactly what happened. Many reviewers and other techtubers that got their hands on the cards first noted that they were lacking at best due to the random performance issues and irregularities in data across all tests that were performed. The first impression that Intel made with these cards seemed to be one of the sole reasons why it has struggled to have a grip anywhere in the GPU market, among other things. So, with that being said, I guess it would be wise to steer clear of these cards. Or maybe not. While the launch of these cards are shabby at best, Intel went hard at work and it did as many driver updates as they could. And many people have already pointed out that these cards are relatively powerful and decent now, despite what the first month of Intel's newest generation of GPUs were like at release. And I'm going to take a chance here and buy one, and hopefully demonstrate that point. I went on ahead and purchased an entry-level ASRock Challenger ITX ARC A380 for the sweet low price of $128.39. It has 6GB of GDDR6 VRAM clocked at 1937 MHz and a clock speed of 2250 MHz. It is a relatively low wattage card, and while not the fastest thing on the earth, for the price might be a better alternative to anything Nvidia has produced recently targeted towards gamers on a budget, or even AMD's entry-level 6000 series cards. And hey, with that high amount of VRAM, you could try out the latest and greatest without having to lower too many settings. Right? Well, we'll see. So, time to downgrade from this RTX 2070 to this A380 just to show you what I mean. Good night, sweet prince. Anyways, after getting this PC plugged back in, it was time to install drivers. And honestly, it kind of felt like any other GPU. I know many complained about the driver software installer and all that jazz, but from what it seems, it is a lot better now. Also, they let you have the ability to toggle the software as an overlay, whereas before that was what you were stuck with. So very good improvements so far, while also allowing people who hopped on early to stay with the older overlay if that's what they have already gotten used to at this point. Nothing else is really going on with it to note that is impressive or different from other driver installer software monitor programs though. But it did notify me that I did need to update my motherboard to enable resizable bar, which increased my performance on this card. And I would normally go ahead and update something like that, but I am having troubles updating my BIOS currently, and I only might see a slight performance increase, so we will have to do without it. Anyways, how is it like using and playing on an Intel ARC card? The honest truth, for the most part, it feels questionable. Was I able to game and use it daily? Yes. Was there a bunch of problems? Absolutely. So many that I might be having a Jeff Gerstmann situation with my ARC GPU. More on that later though. I was able to play almost any game I wanted, but either I wasn't able to maximize certain settings or I had to compromise on other things. Believe it or not, DirectX 9 wasn't the issue, as that problem has been solved thanks to DXVK, which is an open source Vulkan-based translation layer code that was put into the Windows drivers and allows you to play any of your favorite games from DirectX 9 through 11 now. It is used in Linux from what I have read, and it is one of the sole reasons ARC GPUs are now usable. But this didn't fix the problem completely, I think. As with some games, it believes my card doesn't have 6GB of VRAM. This results in me not being able to fully maximize settings in some titles. At the same time, I think some of these games are just a little too old to recognize this GPU. So there is that to keep in mind at least. In other titles, I just can't maximize certain settings without the game crashing. Usually these are shader anti-aliasing settings, which sucks a little, but doesn't stop me from playing the games in their entirety. CSGO was playable, a game that stuttered badly and was very unplayable in the beginning of the ARC GPU's existence, which might not matter much since the new Counter-Strike is coming out, but I felt like I should have mentioned this at least since everyone was quick to ridicule the GPU because it couldn't play Lottery Pew Pew Simulator 2012 without lagging terribly. Ironically, Skyrim was the only game to stutter 8-bit during my tests, but this might not be a big deal for someone who just wants to game for a cheap price now and get updates that fix their problems 3 or 6 months down the line, especially if they are a first-time PC gamer. However, maybe this GPU in reality is a terrible option for someone who is playing on PC for the first time or is just a first-time PC builder / enthusiast. I have had numerous issues with this card that span from crashing in the middle of a game to hitting the start key on Windows and crashing my video drivers. If anyone asks how I do this, it's a speedrun strat. I am coining it and calling it binning. I just made the new world record sub 2.5 seconds. I am currently in the process of validating my speedruns on speedrun.com. Anyways, do I know why some of this is happening? Not really. I know that for someone who might be buying this GPU cheaply right now, since it goes on sale for $120 often, that it might be a terrible idea to get it if you can barely run newer titles. I tried playing Warzone 2.0 and had it running a few times, but then a lot of my footage was either lost to crashes or I could only get it running with minimum settings enabled. Other times I could get it running fairly well, but wouldn't understand why that is even. At first I started thinking this is a DirectX 12 issue, since it would crash and give me a DirectX 12 error. But other DirectX 12 games like Hitman 3 run on medium settings with no big issues. Despite recording a bit weirdly with some random frame drops, it ran on average at around 50 frames per second, and I feel like this is still a little low, but hey, at least it plays DirectX 12 games, I guess. But then it struggled to play other games that are running in lesser DirectX versions, like Hell Let Loose, which I could run at 1080p, but would still have to reduce settings down to their minimums. Frame rate average is more around 30 since the average would only really shoot up to anything above 100 if you were dying looking up at the sky. The game was still playable, you could still get a fun experience at the end of the day. It just isn't ideal though. And I know that the requirements for Hell Let Loose and Hitman 3 are pretty different, but remember what our hardware supposedly has and what we're working with here. But hey, there are bigger problems with this card that I need to go over. Like, remember how I mentioned the Windows key or just the start button on your desktop could crash your video drivers? Yes, that is right. Simply pressing this button sometimes will cause your drivers to freeze, leading to Windows trying to reboot them. Typically, if you are running a game, this happens. And about 50% of the time, it will reboot them, but the other 50% of the time, it will boot loop this process until it blue screens with the code video_TDR_failure. The good news is that you can still Alt-Tab to other windows, sometimes, if you need to tab out of something. But if you are the kind of person who used the Windows key to jump out of a game real quick or to quickly hit the start button to search something up, you're going to have to let that habit die. And what's worse is that this wasn't the only blue screen of death I have gotten with this GPU. At one point, I restarted the PC and I noticed it was very laggy. I checked Task Manager and it said that the utilization of my internet browser was up to 78% while simultaneously having 45% usage on Steam with my GPU. So over 123% of my GPU's utilization was occurring, and it wouldn't stop until I opened Intel Arc Control Panel. It was very strange and I ignored it, and went on ahead and recorded some Arbor 3 frame data, which at first was going kinda good. Then I noticed my memory usage was larger than what my GPU actually has. And then bam, blue screen. This time with a message stating Video Memory Management Internal. Looking up this exact code led me onto a goose chase on what exactly happened. My best guess is that it was a memory leak of sorts, or that it was driver related. I didn't have a parameter to work with, so your guess is as good as mine. I find myself in a position with my experience on this GPU to be very untenable. What is weirder is that Hell Let Loose was also doing this memory glitch, whatever you want to call it, and yet it wasn't crashing. I did have one more hard crash after this, but that one didn't lead to a blue screen. I could tell it was trying to boot loop something, but I wasn't even doing anything specific at that time, other than running Hitman 3, to have that be an investigative event with clues to work with. The memory stuff is so perplexing too when you think about the fact that maybe there is more than 6 GB of VRAM on this card. Like maybe this is a AMD Phenom Tri-Core situation, or something. I don't know. Honestly, MSI Afterburner could just be bugging out with this card. So if you are an armchair engineer, or genius who owns shares with arms, please comment below on how I am not qualified to be speculating here. Anyways, I played Apex. It ran fine. Nothing super noteworthy. It did stutter a little in the beginning of my gaming session, but otherwise, ran not half bad. Thankfully, I could go into settings and limit my VRAM to 6 GB, otherwise maybe it would have some weird issues as well, and I was able to crank up all of my settings to higher max with this game. But while I am getting above 100 frames per second here, and this was in a best case scenario when I was playing, realistically, in multiple games I played, I was getting closer to 60, which is kind of disappointing. At this point, a used RX 580 from AliExpress would be a way better gamble to play on, and you could get it for less than $100 no problem, as I have demonstrated before. So maybe, just maybe, I am having a Jeff Gerstmann situation. What's that? Well, to keep it short, Jeff Gerstmann is a game journalist from the days of gaming magazines to being the king he is now. He is well respected in his own right and is spectacular at reviewing video games. When Fallout 4 came out, he had to review it, and some players were having normal experiences with this game, while others were having laggy, buggy ones. Jeff, unfortunately, was not lucky here, and had a not-so-great experience. Now, critics were quick to do what they normally do, and say that Jeff is wrong and that he maybe doesn't get it. But he wasn't the only one to just get unlucky. That's right. He even mentioned in his review that the PC version is much better to play and that at the time, that would be the better experience. And I am kind of in the same boat here. The only difference is that there isn't a horde of people who will tear me to shreds if I say that maybe the GPU would be better if you ran it on Windows 11 or even Linux. In the future, I want to return to this GPU on Windows 11 to see if that is the case, especially since other big tech channels seem to be having luck with this card. But I've been using this card for a month now, and I just want to move on to other PC stuff. I'll probably use it a little to edit this video, but other than that, I've had my fill. So let's wrap this one up. With that all said and done, should you buy it? I would give another 3 to 6 months personally, because unless you are running Windows 11 or using the ARC A380 for video editing or 3D modeling only, it just isn't worth the money right now given mine and probably your circumstances. I've seen plenty of people with A750s and A770s, and they've had great experiences with those cards. So maybe invest your money into one of those? But these cards aren't budget friendly and are well over $200. I have read that the GPUs have great video encoding, but I didn't test that since most people are buying this card for some cheap gaming. But I will guess that maybe in this case it would be a good idea for that. Until Intel can fix these drivers and cards for that matter, I'd rather wait for their next generation of ARC cards, Battle Mage, to be released later this year. And with the current economy of the used market right now, I would easily recommend an RX 580 from AliExpress any day, even if there is a chance it was used for mining or whatever. But anywho, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will absolutely return to this GPU once more updates on the drivers are released and when I get my hands on a Windows 11 PC. If you have any suggestions or things you would like to see, leave a comment. If you like stuff like this, subscribe for more. Like the video if you did, and as always, thanks for watching.